hosted by Steve Hixson with co-hosts John Stanberry and Franklin Chansey. This is Backfire.
Good morning, everyone. If you were tuning in today as you light your first cigarette to hear Steve Hixson talking on the radio, you're probably surprised to hear me. I'm pretty surprised as well. I came over here to get a cup of coffee and read the paper, and they're telling me Steve's not here, and the janitor is, I guess, having a liver transplant or something, so I'm just stuck here for the next hour or so. I hope you'll bear with me. I really don't know much about what we're doing. The engineer over here, Daniel, told me this is basically a simple format. The host, John Stanberry, gang up on Franklin Chansey for an hour. I try and get him to walk off the air, so they've given me some notes here, and I guess I'll do the best I can. Again, I apologize. The only instructions I've got here is stay until the black guy shows up at 3 o'clock, so do the best I can. Got John and Franklin here today. Very excited. They tell me this is the highest rated radio show in Tennessee, maybe the world. So it's certainly an honor. I want to say hello, Mother. Hello, Father. Hi to my grandparents and everybody listening. Wow. Never thought that it would lead to this. Let's start off today talking about Ira Cox, popular constable here in town, who passed away on November 29th. Certainly a sad thing, but I know we all have good memories of Ira, and maybe if our two hosts here could share some of their memories of Ira and just talk about this development.
Well, one of the great things about living in a community the size of Cleveland, Tennessee, is that you do develop what we might call icons in a community, people who have just seemed to always be there and always be a presence in lots of different capacities. And Ira is certainly one of those people. In my profession, I certainly encountered him almost several times a week. But it wasn't just me, people in the rescue services profession, other families out in the community that he would help. So he's a presence that is certainly going to be missed and warmly remembered for many, many, many years.
Well, you know, Ira, I think, probably is the finest example of what a constable could be. You know, the constable is a constitutionally mandated or allowed office in the state of Tennessee, and Ira was everything that I think anybody could have envisioned a constable being. You know, not just in Franklin's case, Ira served a lot of papers for a lot of the law firms in town, but Ira was at the front end of catching criminals. He was one of the big drug busts. Actually, Ira was the one that caught the guy in the middle of the interstate and was first on the scene. And beyond that, Ira was just a good, decent man. You know, politics can be kind of tough, and there were several cases where the prevailing winds would have been easier for Ira to be on one side of a coin, and Ira took a stand. Kind of isolated, but he took a principled stand on issues, and even if he was by himself, he was willing to do what he thought was right, and he will be sorely missed by the community.
Well, I just want to say, I didn't know Ira too well, but in the time that I did spend with him and my interactions with him, he struck me as somebody who would always tell you exactly what he thought. He was very honest. It didn't seem to ever have an agenda. Just a great guy, and we'll miss him. Why don't we take a moment of silence here just to remember Ira Cox, great Bradley County Constable. Okay, now back to Backfire. Great headline yesterday in the Banner, very exciting news. Lee University announcing more expansion closer to the downtown area. Everybody's got to be excited about this. Always a popular thing when Lee announces some expansion. What do you all think?
Well, I think this particular expansion is going to help stabilize that portion of the downtown area, going to help further the implementation of the downtown master plan, going to make the downtown area even more attractive for from a lifestyle perspective, and ultimately those are the types of things that help promote business growth and development in a community. You need a thriving downtown, and I think that that's a big step in the link. I commend Alan Jones for his assistance with that project. I commend Lee for the vision that they've shown over the last several years, and I'm excited about it.
Now, who is this Alan Jones?
Some ne'er-do-well here in town.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that. John, are you obligated to disagree with Franklin on this?
No, I think it's wonderful. Let me be serious and say, I think, especially yesterday in Rotary Club, I was struck by Dr. Kahn's description of what they were going to be able to do, and especially the fact that he said, as you're sitting on Ocoee Street at the corner of Ocoee and Central, and you look to your left, you'll see St. Luke's Church. And then he said, imagine if you look to your right, and instead of seeing that square 1960s building, you see an expanse of grass, and that grass leads to the big columns that front the former First Baptist Church. I think that was a very striking image that he created in everyone's mind, and I'm excited about it. I'm also glad to see Franklin, understanding what free enterprise can do without government. Two entities were able to come together and do something that will benefit all of society with no tax increases and without any government control.
It was like a bolt of lightning struck me, John.
It's amazing what free enterprise is able to do.
Well, can either of you see any reason why anybody in the community would be upset about this expansion closer to the downtown area, or is it a win-win for everybody?
Well, I'm sure there are always a few discontented voices, but I think it is a win-win for the community.
Well, I am a big believer in historical home neighborhoods, and by that I don't mean 100-year-old homes. I mean that I think it's nice for neighborhoods to know that they'll always be residential neighborhoods. So you always have a little tension there as things change and progress. But I think Lee has done an excellent job in blending the two and actually being able to complement both interests without any real downside. So I can't imagine anybody fussing about this.
Franklin, do you think Ira would support this expansion?
I certainly do.
All right. Well, then it's got to be good if Ira Cox would be willing to put his name on it. Other big news locally this week: County Commission voting for $2 million in funding for the industrial park. Not a surprise to some people, but I know others out there were against this. I think Mel Griffith being one of those. How do you all feel? Were you excited with the vote? Franklin, are you unhappy about it because you sense that John is pleased with it?
Well, I'm disappointed if we're going to agree more than one time during this time, but I do think that it's an important step for the county, for the whole community. It's an area where the city and county are partnering. I think that's a good thing. And I think it's vitally important that we be planning for growth as opposed to just reacting to it after it happens. And I think that this is an important step in that process.
Well, I might disagree with Franklin on a point while not disagreeing in principle. I personally don't think this is planning. We have no industrial land to sell, and there are people who have been saying that for years. And I think this is a reaction. Now, do we need it? Yeah, we need it, and I'm glad to see it. But it should have been done years ago. We shouldn't have ever been in a position to where we don't have land to offer to these people. Now, the county mayor just a couple of years ago said we didn't need any shovel-ready land. Well, the problem is intelligent business people in the community bought land because they knew that we would need this. And the county is now buying that land from them. I'm happy about that, but I wish the county had bought the land in the first place at the price that the local businessmen were able to buy it at. But that would have required forethought and planning.
John, who screwed that up?
Personally, I think Mayor Davis screwed that up. You have him on record saying we didn't need any shovel-ready land just 3 years ago in the campaign. Well, frankly, we did need shovel-ready land. And now it's costing us more because someone else bought that shovel-ready land first, which is great. That's the way free enterprise works. Free enterprise benefits the person with vision. And unfortunately, our government doesn't have any vision. Franklin was right to reference the idea of reacting rather than being on the front end.
Well, the difference is, though, that this delay in obtaining this kind of property is the natural result of the incessant series of complaints that everything government does is a wasteful expenditure. It's not. And many of the things that government does are absolutely necessary for the vitality and the welfare of the community. It is true that we should have accumulated this land a decade ago, not 3 years ago. It should have been before that. But that would have required people to step up and say, we're going to invest in the community, and that means spending money. And that's become such a no-no that we can't have a rational conversation about it anymore. Everybody should be against government waste, but that doesn't mean that everything government does is bad.
But Franklin, the problem with what you're saying is the Republicans and the conservatives and the Tea Party people, they don't say everything the government does is bad. They say too much of what the government is bad. And the reason that you don't get forethought and planning out of the government is because it's not their money.
The reason
and nobody
you don't get
spends
that is
their money.
The reason you don't get that is because you've created a climate of fear where the only thing a majority of members of the county commission in particular want to say is that I did not raise your property taxes. And if they do that, they think they've been successful in their elected positions such that they ought to be elected again.
Well, but
and that's what happens.
If they weren't wasting money on things that aren't a priority, they wouldn't have to raise anybody's taxes and still wouldn't have to compromise on planning for the future.
Well, taxes haven't been raised here in how long, John?
But that's assuming
how long?
I don't know, Franklin. It's been a good while.
Well, and that's more than 10 years.
Let me discuss that for a second, though, Franklin. Anybody out there listening to me, even though technically, like what Franklin's saying, taxes haven't gone up, do any of you all believe you're not paying more to the government now than you were 10 years ago? For example, the city regularly puts new fees in place. Now, that's not a tax, supposedly. But if you're having to pay something that you weren't having to pay, it's a tax. You can call it what you want to. The assessments. You're not allowed to raise taxes through the assessment. Does anybody think that your property taxes haven't increased over the last 10 years? And on top of that, when the economy goes through the kind of contraction we've gone through, and you can't sell your house for a third what you could have sold it for 4 years ago, but the government's still collecting the same level of taxes, is that not a tax increase?
Well, there's a method for you to challenge that if you choose to do it, isn't there?
And how successful on average, is the citizen going to be with that, Franklin?
A lot more successful than you'd imagine.
Most people aren't going to do it, because they don't know how, and the government counts on that. The fact is, taxes creep up through lots of ways outside of an actual rate increase.
Guys, Mel Griffith voted against this. Do you think it's fair to say that Mel's role on the county commission now is that of what Roy Smith's was for many years, in which he seems to just vote against the majority of commissioners on any motion just for the sake of doing it? Is that something you all are in agreement on, or any thoughts on that?
I wouldn't be in agreement with that. I would point out that Mel represents the same district that Roy represented, and somehow every time we talked about Roy, we said, oh, Roy's just against this. Well, maybe the people of the 6th District were against it. And I don't think it's a bad thing to have a contrarian voice on any group saying, hey, wait a minute, slow down. You know, you can always do something else. You can't undo things. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all to have someone voicing an opposition.
Well, you know, I know one of the commissioners was quoted in the article in the paper as saying, I have concerns with this commission obligating a future commission for money in 2016. I have some concerns with the government being in the industrial development business. That
was Connie Wilson?
Yeah, that's a
philosophical
I guess a philosophical
position.
Difference, but it's certainly not a growth-oriented.
Well, it depends, Franklin. Are you saying, these business people bought this land to further growth? That didn't require the government. Now, the government's going to step in because the government needs to have, they feel, a role to play. But development happens all over this country without the government being involved.
Well, we're talking about major industrial development, and it's very unlikely that takes place without government involvement.
Well, sometimes
there's not going to be an Amazon or a Vaca or a GE
but Franklin,
without the government being involved in some of those.
You're
incentives.
right, but some people think that that's a problem, because guess what happens when Amazon's tax incentives go away? And I'm not saying Amazon exactly, but companies all the time move an entire plant because another county government gives them a better deal. Well, what does that do to the county they leave? You know, some people think we've created an environment where the taxpayers are having to fund this competitive waste, basically.
This is compelling radio. This is as good as it gets. I want to say hi again to my mother and father. Other big story out there this week, we've all heard about it by now. Sunday night's football game. Bob Costas using his time during the halftime show to basically, in what many people feel was an effort to advocate stricter gun control laws. How do you all feel about that? You think Bob was right in what he said? Do we need to have stricter gun control laws?
What we need to have is more open and honest debate. There's a long tradition in America amongst journalists too of them taking aside part of their time and designating things as their opinion or their commentary, and it being clear that they're stating their opinion at that point.
Is Bob Costas a journalist, or is he a sports commentator?
He's a sports journalist.
Well, the people tuning into the football game, did they want a political diatribe, or did they want to watch the football game?
Well, I don't know. Did they want to hear the story at all about the football player who shot his wife at the team, or, and then killed himself at the team headquarters? That's part of the story. I don't think there's anything wrong about that.
I think Bob
Was there something wrong when Jim Lampley was moderating the Olympics and covering the raid on the Olympic Village in '72? I mean, that's just what happens sometimes.
There is a difference between CNN or even Fox News and ESPN. ESPN is supposed to be the game.
I'm not afraid of discussion or debate.
Nobody's afraid of it. I don't think it was appropriate. I mean, by the way, there was a University of Michigan grad student that did a study about 10 years ago on gun control issues, and he found that for every dollar the NRA spent in pro-gun media, the anti-gun people got $100 in free coverage. So in Bob Costa's case, what's the per second cost of the time that he took on air? And will that be offered to the NRA or to the gun owners of America for a contrarian opinion? Will they be given equal time?
John, let me ask you, what's the downside, if there is one, to the world that Bob Costas would have us living in? Let's say that Americans surrendered their weapons, turned them into the government, and we had a society here where all law-abiding citizens chose not to own firearms. What's the downside to that? I mean, I think that the impression I got from that halftime speech was that we would have a society free of gun-related murders. Are we just missing something? Why not jump on this bandwagon?
Nearly all of the massacres that have taken place in gun-free zones. So it's amazing to me that the gun-free zones are the main spot that most of these crazies choose to attack people with. You also have all kinds of troublesome little things like facts, like every state that's enacted a concealed carry law saw dramatic decreases in violent crime. You also have minor little facts like all the major cities that are basically gun-free, New York, Chicago, are actually the highest crime rate cities, the highest gun crime rate cities. The fact of the matter is, Clinton administration actually tried to downplay the number of defensive uses of guns in a study they did during his tenure. And what they did was, if you were a liquor store owner and you carried a gun and you were assaulted 3 times in a year and you used your gun 3 times that year to stop that crime, they only counted that as 1 time because you're the same owner. In that study that tried to downplay it, they still found 2.5 million times a year guns are used to stop crimes, not to perpetrate them. So the fact of the matter is, the facts don't support gun control. Never have, never will.
Franklin,
I'm not particularly wired up about this issue, but I do think that many of the statistics and so forth that John cites are just total nonsense. they're just fabricated.
They're FBI crime statistics.
Let me explain why. Let me explain why. First of all, violent crime in particular, is down all over America for the last 20 years.
Gun ownership is
just dramatically.
But gun ownership
Hold
is
on
up.
a minute, John. Let me finish. I'll let you talk all you wanted to just a moment ago. You be quiet for a moment. It's down all over America, not just in places where they have gun violence, where they don't. It's down in big cities, too. That's been a consequence of lots of things: changes in community strategies for policing, changes in economic development. Second of all, he uses this idea that all these so-called gun-free zones are where all these crimes happen. Well, here's the problem with that. All of these cities are surrounded by places where there's easy access to guns. If you have to walk out of New York City and you go 5 miles outside of it and it's easy to get those guns, that's a meaningless statement. Now, if you got a philosophical belief or a constitutional belief that you've got a right to keep and bear arms, fine. That's fine. That's a philosophical issue. But this nonsense about how, these statistics, 2.5 million crimes were held down by active use of guns. That also includes law enforcement in those numbers.
No, that didn't.
It does,
that
too.
did not,
Yes,
Franklin.
it does.
It did not.
2.5 million
yes,
times,
that
John?
was Janice Reno's Justice Department study. I'll be glad to get the study for you if you'd like it.
I just got a text from Steve Hixson here that said John is right.
And by the way, Franklin, since you want to talk about New York City, and that's always the liberal argument, well, the reason gun-free New York City has all this crime is because the guys go outside to New Jersey and they buy the gun and bring it in. Fine. Let's look at Australia and Great Britain. About 8 years ago, Great Britain outlawed the private ownership of all guns. Now, for all you geographically confused people, Great Britain is an island. So unless someone is crossing the North Sea and swimming back over with a gun, it's pretty isolated. It's an island. After they outlawed the private ownership of all guns, they saw a 40% increase in violent crime. They saw a huge increase in home invasions. Every violent crime increased after they outlawed the private ownership of guns on an island, Franklin. No outside influence.
John, Great Britain has not outlawed the private ownership
You
of
have to
all
have it
guns.
registered. You have to have it locked in a
Make up your mind.
You have to have it locked in a hunting club, Franklin.
Did they outlaw it or did they regulate
They outlawed it in the home for defense. There. I'm sorry. Technically, they outlawed it for having it in your home for defense. So in other words, when that guy starts kicking your front door in, just tell him to wait while you go down to the local gun club and retrieve your gun.
Steve Hixson says John is right, for what it's worth.
We really should have had a recording of that so we could have it in his voice. It's much more effective.
The next time I come over here to get a cup of coffee at 7:20, I will bring one. Get roped into this.
Now,
Seriously,
I will say, here's one main problem, though, and Franklin might be able to agree with this. The real problem with what Bob Costa did and with what a lot of these anti-gun people do is it's easy to blame an inanimate object, and it keeps you from having to discuss the real issues. For example, the football player. He had no father figure in his life. He partied a lot. He had already been accused of domestic violence before.
Was he black?
He fought. His wife fought with him, and she had threatened to move out. She was out partying all night before. There's also the idea that he may have some concussion issues, which football is dealing with. So Bob Costa's sitting up here. He makes his living off of football. He doesn't want to discuss the violent nature of the sport itself. He doesn't want to discuss the possible physical impact and damage to the brain that the sport might be causing. He doesn't want to discuss the ego and the way these guys are coddled by the owners and protected for any of their wrongs. But it's easy to blame a gun, but the problem is that deflects from maybe actually a good conversation that might solve some of the problem.
Is there any real threat that either of you sees in the next 20 or 30 years of Americans losing their right to bear arms? Do you think, John, that let's say that Democrats retain control of the White House indefinitely from here on, do you see a Democratic agenda to take guns out of American homes?
I do. I mean, you've got this administration on record as supporting the UN Small Arms Treaty, which, if you read the treaty and you listen to some of the reports of the other countries that are pushing it, they actually specifically mention the United States and the Second Amendment as being one of the main problems to gun control in the world. When you read Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid, and they're on record as wanting the assault weapons ban, which did absolutely nothing to help anything. Yes, I think these people are disdainful of citizens' rights to own guns.
Well, there's two problems with that. First of all, you say the assault weapons ban did nothing. Well, as you've pointed out, violent crime rates were falling in America. Is there a link between that? Not saying there is, but, but I don't know that it's not.
But
either.
Franklin, they've fallen more since the ban expired.
The second and more salient point is that, contrary to the myth that the Republican Party and the NRA keep pushing, this administration has done nothing to promote gun control. And in fact, there are more expanded gun control rights now than when Obama took office.
Franklin,
it's also true
it signed
that
on to the UN Small Arms Treaty.
Will that change in the second term, Franklin?
I don't think so. I see no political wind.
The president's already gone on record as saying
whether he
oh,
personally
wait a minute.
likes it or not.
So now he's not responsible for his own words.
No, I didn't say that.
Did George Bush say it? Is that who's to blame this time?
John, I know you live in a fantasy world
No,
where a
world.
Muslim president born in Kenya got elected president and is here to take away all your rights.
That's not true, Franklin. Look, I know that was fiction that he wrote into his biography for his publishing house in New York.
The problem is that actions
true.
speak louder than words, and this president has done nothing to promote further gun control. In fact, the only bill he signed involving gun control expanded gun rights, and you know that's true.
That was before the election.
He signed it, didn't he?
Yeah, because he
While
knew
he was
because
president,
Democrats
didn't
figured
he?
out a couple of years ago that pushing it overtly was a loser.
So in other words, we have a president who has signed no gun control legislation, has introduced no gun control legislation, and that's the bogeyman who's coming to take away
Franklin,
your guns.
You have a president who has gone on record as stating he thinks the assault weapons ban should be brought back.
Sure.
He has a party.
I do too.
He has a party behind him that supports all kinds of gun control measures, and he has an administration that has endorsed the UN Small Arms Treaty. If you want to look at that treaty, it will openly attack private ownership of guns in America. It actually talks about the Second Amendment, and he's signed on to the treaty.
Folks, we're going to be taking your calls in just a few minutes at 614-5553. I know that bad actor Ella and the sports kid will be excited to hear that. So get ready, 614-5553. Gentlemen, Christmas is coming up. It's on the horizon here. I think that our listeners out there want to know, are you all planning to get each other a Christmas present? And if so, can you tell us on the air right now what you'll be getting for each other?
Well, I've called John's wife, and it's really sort of a secret what we're getting him. It's a joint present, though.
I'm getting him a Thomas Sowell book on economics.
All right. Guys, we're going to take a cigarette break here.
You are listening to
taking a water break.
WOOP-LP,
All right. Okay.
Cleveland, Tennessee.
We'll be back in just a few
WOOP-FM is a
minutes.
broadcasting service of the Traditional
Peace and
Music
love.
Resource Center.
Well, it's been so hot we decided to do one called...
You're listening to Backfire with Steve Hixson. We'll be right back after this.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP-FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into checking the cash.